Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of DIV Innovators. Today I'm joined by Philip Hover-Smoot, CEO of Atlas Company, pushing the boundaries of commercial space through competitive, autonomous spacecraft racing. Philip, great to have you on. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Well, this is a very unique but super cool opportunity to chat with you. Before we get into Atlas Cup, you've had a unique career path, defense law, satellite launches, space domain awareness. Walk us through your background, give the listeners kind of, how you've come up in the, space field, if you will, how you got into the space ecosystem and how you found yourself now at Atlas Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a crazy story, actually, but definitely came from pointy end of the spear defense world, which is why Atlas Cup to me is, kind of a new breath of fresh air in that it is intentionally commercial. But yeah, me come out of years of experience in the space industry and the defense industry. So most recently, I was the CEO at a company called Scout Space. So we did space domain awareness, help supporting the space supremacy mission set for Space Systems Command, primarily geo and cislunar qualified sensors and software processing for defense and intelligence operators. So ran that company for 2.5 years, but actually had a longer history with it as outside counsel for them before, an investor in and board member for the company for a while before actually joining as an employee. Prior to that, I was the general counsel at Spaceflight. So Spaceflight, of course, is the kind of the front runner for what rideshare has become. They bought a Falcon 9 and parted it out. They built some of the first kind of successfully, commercial TVs, orbital transfer vehicles that were out there. Launched a few hundred satellites over the course of the years, did some amazing stuff. Before that, I was deputy GC and chief ethics and compliance officer at a company called Momentous. So they were also an OTV operator. They're still around, but that was a kind of a crazy story. Went to them before they had actually hired any employees as a consultant, helped them on their national security issues. They had a non-US founder that needed export licensure in order to operate the business. I spent 3.5 years of my life fighting the good fight, trying to get licensing for them. Ended up not working. But in the meantime, the company got built up. We went public at 1.7 billion valuation, and then it all kind of fell apart. So that was a fun experience. And before that, a number of different roles at Raytheon. So primarily remote sensing, electronic warfare, short stint in missiles, but all on the international side for the Office of General Counsel.
Awesome. And so you got out of that one before it went to shit, right?
No, I was there for all of the shit. Yeah, no, I literally went from like pre-employee all the way through, like funding, Series A, post Series A bridge stuff, all the way through the SPAC, got subpoenaed, went through all the investigation stuff, went through the CFIUS process, went through all of the investigations, the audits. I think they got raided by the FBI like a day or two after I accepted my offer to join the company and quit Raytheon. So pretty much it was my entire employment at Momentous was one dumpster fire from the other, but it was a blast. The people were great. I still, hold all of them in the highest esteem. It was just heady times, I think is the way to put it.
Yeah, they're still around though, right? They've survived this all, right?
They are, yeah, they were a customer of Scouts actually. So very excited to see Vigoride 7 fly. Hopefully later this year. It's got a Scout sensor on there that we've provided both the hardware and a bunch of software support for. So yeah, I'm going to be meeting up with them next week actually. So, we'll see where that goes.
Fantastic. No, yeah, that had to be, it's hard enough being in startups, the emotional roller coaster that you're on, and then have stuff like that, just what the highs and lows, I can only imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fun though, right? I mean, it's like I was a lawyer. I was like a kind of a baby lawyer, right? It was like my first in-house real job in a startup. And it was like, here's this absolutely unsolvable dumpster fire of a problem. Go figure it out. And it was, I don't know. I mean, I spent years fighting the good fight, and it just didn't work out at the end of the day. But I did my job.
Well, then what was the inflection point that kind of led you towards building a commercial company?
I've been working on this concept for years, actually. So all the way back, right around the Momentous era, actually, COVID times. It was like sitting around, like all of us trying to figure out what in the hell's going on in the world, like watching Drive to Survive, watching The Expanse, sitting on an exercise bike at the gym one morning, and I'm like, why hasn't anyone like done this yet, right? And all the technology necessary to have a competitive ecosystem in space exists today. It has existed for some time. And frankly, this kind of this sudden new interest that Drive to Survive, the series about F1 on Netflix was creating was like, kind of this moment of like, hey, look, there's interest. There's actual fans, sports fan interest in the technical stories and the programmatic stories and the politics and the business side of these things. You can create a story out of this in space. So that was really it. And then, I think 5 years ago would have been too early, right? So I spent my time kind of like getting my experience and going off and doing various things, right? But I kind of touched all the different constituent components, right? I did multiple highly maneuverable platforms. I did the launch segment. I did operations stuff. I did the regulatory. I did licensing. And then most recently, of course, I did in-space optics, which is kind of the thing that connects all of this together, right? In-space optics is quickly becoming commoditized, right? I mean, there's dozens of cameras that are going up on a regular basis. They're getting substantially better. Downlinking capability is getting better. I mean, heck, we got someone trying to do live 4K video in space right now. That's unlocking a whole bunch of new applications from an entertainment perspective. And suddenly we're like, all right, cool. We've got the launch capability, the operations capability, the maneuverability capability. Now we have the ability to go image it in space. And that really just, again, is this, oh, hey, we can do this. Let's go do it. So I actually started the process, again, after 4 years of kind of back of the napkin weekends, kind of like thinking through what this could be, started the process of actually exiting all the way back in early 2025, talking with the board at Scout about, hey, look, I had this crazy idea. I'm going to go do something new and different. What does that look like? And then finally exited end of last year, got myself some funding lined up, and now I'm off to the races.
That is nuts. So, yeah, when you look at then Atlas, the Atlas Cup, what is it? Well, and I have to go back, by the way, because what you said just resonated with me. Used to fly Eagles F-15s at the weapons school, and there, especially in our division or our squadron, BFM, so 1v1 maneuvering was like the sport of kings. And I always was like, man, if we had this commercialized where I could put a big tide emblem on the back of a jet while I'm gunning, I'm like, "Rawr," and somehow figure out with all the new cameras how to, like, there's something there. So I love where you're going. It would be awesome.
Totally, and that's also part of like funny enough, right? There's a little family history here, right? Like my uncle, former colonel in the Air Force in the Nevada Air National Guard, actually flew F4s. He started the sport class in air racing. So it's been kind of a mainstay of the Reno air races. It's now part of like the NAC championship stuff, right? I mean, and that it is kind of that, right? It is highly maneuverable, customs, aircraft flying, complex maneuvers. So I mean, there's real potential there. So again, I'm not the first person to have this idea. There's kind of like
Oh, no,
natural
no. No, of course.
new shit out there, right? So yeah.
No, the good idea factory is alive and well. It's those who can execute, right?
And that is the whole thing, right? So again, I'm not the first person thinking about sports in space. There have been a bunch of people over the years that have thought about it. Frankly, I mean, the people have looked at racing in space previously. It's been in media and popular culture for forever. But I'm gonna be the first one to do it because I'm leveraging the best in the commercial ecosystem, right? Like I'm not out there trying to build some crazy spacecraft to go off and go race and do all this bespoke development and R&D. No, I'm taking the lowest hanging fruit. I'm doing what we can do with the existing, industrial base, and I'm taking it and I'm just putting it together in a way that people haven't thought of before. And that means that I can go start producing sports content in space as soon as the end of this year if I can get the stars to align on using existing assets. And that is the cachet, right? It is not about being the first to have the thought. I'm 100% not. It's about the first one to actually execute on the idea and demonstrate that I can do it, produce it, and distribute it, and then I can go off and go monetize it. And I think that story is actually coming together much, much faster than expected. So my hope is, again, my biggest challenge and hope is that I can get the stars to align on using existing assets to go off and go demonstrate sprint format racing in Q4 of this year. And that'll be, I'll be years in advance of any of the competitors that are out there.
Yeah, so talk to me specifically, like, what do you envision here? What are you doing? The operations behind it, the outcome?
Again, I'm introducing professional sports to space through racing, right? So think uncrewed satellites racing head to head in low Earth orbit. A little bit of F1, a little bit of America's Cup or Sail GP, but in space against the most amazing backdrop you've ever possibly seen. The maneuvers themselves are fairly straightforward, right? There are some physics limitations to how this actually works in space. You can't necessarily have like head to head, neck and neck racing because as one accelerates, you just kind of like, you leave. So if you're at the same altitude, you're going to be going the same speed effectively. But what we can do is we can gamify and create competition events and kind of milestones during a race around maneuvers and propulsion, right? So we can have a series of turns or maneuvers, if you will, where we say, all right, turn one is an altitude race, right? We're going to go from 550 to 600 kilometers, right? So that requires the spacecraft to orient, turn, position, and then propel to change its altitude, right? Or to accelerate to increase altitude. And then we can do things like plane changes, inclination changes. They're kind of the same thing, but slightly different variants. And we can basically do kind of left turns, right turns, diagonal maneuvers. And as we do this, we can stitch together a series of potential maneuvers, which again is very similar to sail racing if you think about it, right? America's Cup just kind of picks an arbitrary body of water and says, hey, look, you show up, you come and bring a compliant boat. We're going to set out a dozen buoys and we're going to tell you what order to go around the buoys. And it's up to you to go figure out how to most efficiently navigate the buoys. We're doing the exact same thing, just in space.
And so what do you envision? I mean, conceptually, okay, I get you're going to have then like one guy race and another guy race and, or it could be anywhere, I guess, because, right, it's random buoys, if you will. And then you've got like I'm just trying to think head to head. And then how does someone get this vehicle, satellite, whatever they're using out there? Is that part of it? Or is it, and once it's out there, it goes? Like kind of more the, how is this going to happen?
So a couple of things. One, we don't dislike the idea of having individual competitors off doing some form of some form of racing on their own, right? That's kind of like all of the first week of the Tour de France, right? It's a individual competitors over a fixed distance course, one by one by one by one. There's no reason we can't do that. We do, however, like coordinated operations. And we're not, again, talking initially about people who are physically co-located, right? So this is not remote proximity operations, but this is people at different points of orbit, but at kind of a normalized starting point. So again, back to the sail race analogy, right? Sail racing doesn't have a physical line in the sand that you kind of stand at and then proceed, right? They'll say, here is the starting point, right? Basically a virtual line in the ocean and say, look, at noon, we're going to blow a horn and, you're off to the races, right? So there's a little bit of gamification prior to the start where everyone's jockeying for position to be in the best possible position. And then you're off, right? So it's very, very similar to that where we can have people at different points around the earth effectively where they're very slightly distanced, but they're going to perform the same types of maneuvers in approximately the same period of time. We like that from a storytelling perspective. It helps us kind of demonstrate that, like that the competitive story. But it doesn't mean we can't do individual races point to point. Additionally, we've already started talking we've got some interest from early teams that are indicating that they're going to go off and go race with us in 2028 that are looking at also doing things like exhibition runs in the next 12 months or so, right? And these are people that are already flying satellites that basically are like, look, we're going to be up and operating and have time and the ability to maneuver prior to kind of race operations starting. And we want to go off and go perform a series of maneuvers as if we were performing a race in the interim. So we like pretty much all of that, right? Whatever allows us to go produce content we love. But I'm still getting ahead of myself a little bit. Let me back up and just kind of explain the con-ops of how we even get to racing, right? So, fundamentally what we're looking at here, again, we have some creative ideas about how to go off and go create race content in the near term. Let's set that aside for a minute. Let's talk about what we're doing in 2028. That's our kind of inaugural Grand Prix. That's like the big show that we're building towards. That's the full production concept. That's the full marketing concept. That's 12 months of storytelling with the teams in advance to go off and go tell the stories behind it. To get to that, there's a couple of different things. So we're doing big performant chemical propulsion. So think 200, 250 kilogram class spacecraft with chemical propulsion. These are big, performant, expensive machines that are out there. There's about 60 companies or so that are kind of like, real that are out there actually building these things. There's a good population of people who are building them. And then we're also going to be doing a university class. And we've already had some very good early interest from a number of leading aeroastro programs that have basically said, hey, look, we're already funding this from a mechanical engineering perspective for our mechanical engineering automotive students. They're already building satellites. I've launched a bunch of those when we were at spaceflight. So, there's a good story there as well. So we've got professional big satellites, chemical propulsion, and then like a university league as well. To get to that, though, we're not asking people to go build bespoke racing satellites, right? I'm trying to bring the barriers to entry here down as low as possible so I can get people to participate because I don't have a sport if I don't have people actually flying. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to draw the bounds of the rules and the form factors around what people are already building today. So again, there's dozens of companies that are already building these satellites. They're already going to be up in space, right? Almost all of those 60 or so companies have funding and plans and licensure and have satellites in build for launch over the next 2-3 years. Many of them have lifetimes that are substantially longer than their existing commercial kind of business uses, right? So they might go deploy a satellite or reposition something or, not yet, to be fair, but one day maybe they'll get there or they'll host a payload. But those missions aren't going to necessarily last, more than a year or 2 or 3. At the end of that time, they have in many instances, remaining propulsion capability. They have paid, hundreds of thousands of dollars for their licensing. So, and they're paying their operators to maintain, TT&C and just kind of like orbital maintenance and daily operations. These things become a sunk cost, right? So we want to take existing assets that are already there. So we're not touching the launch segment at this point. We're taking existing assets and we're just giving them an opportunity to go fly kind of apples to apples comparisons head to head in space to go demonstrate who's good. And this gets back to the kind of the core of why this actually makes sense, right? So one, I don't have a business if I don't have people racing. But the appetite that's already been communicated for companies that are building these things to go demonstrate that they are in fact good and they are in fact the best is real. And that's real because space is a really challenging environment, right? Like if you don't have good demonstrable, publicly available data about performance, how do you market yourself? How do you demonstrate to someone that you build the best propulsion system or that you build the best spacecraft? It's virtually impossible, right? You can have like some, executive at a trade show talking about how good you are, but the best way to demonstrate excellence is to go off and go prove that you're best. And I think people realized already just in the last couple of weeks of me being out there talking about it that this is an amazing opportunity to take stuff that's already being paid for, right? Existing assets, existing planned demonstration missions, and use it in a way that can be really, really, really accretive to their ability to go market their own products.
So, I mean, you you have a non-space, person other than just through the interactions on like this podcast in my background, but obviously fuel's a problem, right? I would think, because there's are you working with like orbital fuel refueler companies, those kind of things? Or again, you're just like, get it up here however you want to manage it, figure it out. But here's some partner ecosystem partnerships that are coming in to support. Like, are you doing something like that?
100%. Yeah. So we are, I think, into technically our sixth week of operations as a business. And we've already signed better part of 3 dozen partnerships with folks across the space industry and sports tech media entertainment world, primarily with a focus on the space side. And that does include folks, including prop systems, tank manufacturers, a company that wants to be the pit stop in space, right? They're doing refueling technologies. And they're like, hey, this is obviously something that we can play in. So very much that's of interest. And again, this is one of those things that we love because if you think about a competitive racing ecosystem in any other format, right? If you think about automotive racing, there's a role for everyone to play, right? It doesn't matter if you're a fan in the stands, if you're the guy pouring the asphalt at the track, if you're the person building the metal nozzle that goes into the car to refuel it, or the team principal managing the whole show, or a sponsor. It doesn't matter. There's a role for everyone to play. And what I've been out talking to these people about across sports and space is, well, look, like if I can create this ecosystem, there's a way for everyone to participate. And a lot of those participation opportunities become new revenue verticals that otherwise don't exist, right? This is new space. This is new opportunity that literally cannot exist. There's no way to make money off of advertising on a spacecraft, for instance, unless you have an audience. And I'm bringing the audience, right? There's no way to, make money as a space domain awareness company providing tracking for racing opportunities and racing operations unless there's a race to go track, right? There's just new opportunity here. And I think people are starting to clue into the fact that is real. And that's why, again, in just a couple of weeks, we've got dozens of partners signed up to early deals saying, hey, look, we're excited about this. We don't know exactly what we're going to be able to do. Maybe we'll be a team. Maybe we'll be a sponsor. Maybe we'll be a vendor into the league or a vendor into a team. Doesn't matter, but we're here. Let's talk about it and figure it out.
Yeah, that's so cool. Now, talk to me then. I mean, okay, so conceptually, I get it. People enter space, they've got satellites, or they're setting up a special on a university and they want to participate. They get the rules and then they cook it. How are you creating a demand signal from a viewer want to do this? Or, obviously are not well, you might be, I don't know, physically recording these things moving, or all kind of GPS, dotted line, Tron style, or like how are you envisioning creating that excitement and demand to commercialize?
No, and creating a fan experience that's world class is probably our biggest challenge, right? So it's a bit of a crawl, walk, run approach, right? So initially, yeah, it's going to be visualizations. It's going to be some really quite beautiful and effective tracking capabilities combined with some traditional broadcast and some in-space optics. Over time, though, of course, we love the idea of creating immersive experiences or even kind of human, real experiences. Of course, that's further down the road, but we like the idea of utilizing some of these new entertainment venues like Sphere or Cosm to go off and go provide kind of pseudo immersive butts in seats, go get a beer and a burger kind of experiences that are so traditional to sport. We're not there yet. That's not going to be this year or next year. Maybe in a couple years out, we can go make that happen. But there's some really interesting opportunities there. And then longer term, of course, right? I mean, we've already been talking with some of the people that are out there doing things like lunar hotels and space stations, right? They're all out selling tickets for people to go off and go to space and look out the window anyways. Let's give them something really cool to look at. And if you look at the history of, again, automotive racing, partnering with the hospitality industry, there's a great history there of basically selling premium packages at really, really nice hotels overlooking Monaco, for instance, and basically saying, look, pay us $100,000 for 2 nights and like we'll give you a patio on the straightaway in Monaco. So we like all those ideas down the road. We're not there yet, right? We try to be, again, very, I hate the term, but like we're very down to earth, right? We are very much focused on what the state of the art can enable today, right? Yeah, we have all these wonderful ideas about what we can do down the road. I want to see them all happen, but what I care about today is taking real tech that exists today that I can go buy commercially and go off and go do it and then produce content around it and start to develop that fan excitement and the storytelling around the teams and the storytelling around the technology and the potential of what racing in space can actually go off and go be. That's my job today. So near term content production is really, really important. Now, the final point here, though, is this is something that is a well-oiled machine on the sports front, right? So sports is a big freaking business, right? Substantially larger than the space industry, right? Like the deals are like billions of dollars at a minimum. So there's a lot of money, and that has resulted in a very, very substantial supportive industrial base on the sports side, right? So there's vendors available for all of this stuff, right? So I've already been engaging with a number of them. I'm building out my advisory board with basically luminaries from the sports and entertainment world to go help me navigate that. So I look at the content production issue and the fan excitement challenge as something that is really a math problem, right? That is, I need to go raise additional capital to go off and go engage these world-class vendors to go build me a world-class product. I don't have to go recreate the wheel here, right? I'm not doing R&D to go figure it out. I'm just going to take the best that's available and I'm going to apply it to a new venue. That's it. And I think that's going to work out really beautifully. It just needs, to be funded and executed on.
Who are those luminaries? Are you talking like Dana White with UFC and
Right now, somebody we're like a month and a half old as a business. So we've got Sandy Brown officially signed and announced. So he's the former commissioner for Major League Lacrosse, former head of sports for ESPN Asia, former head of sport for Univision. Long history in both league operations and the kind of like sports broadcast production side. Additionally, we have a not yet announced TV executive with a long history in space stuff, and I've got two other people in negotiation that we'll hopefully bring on in the next month or so. So still early days, right? But we are trying to basically build out really kind of exclusively on that sports and entertainment side because that's where my gap is. Weirdly, on the space operations side, the race operations side, I dare say I can do that, right? That is actually a fairly straightforward thing for me to go off and go do. It sounds insane, but that's real. What is the biggest challenge again is making sure that I translate what we can do in space today into something that gets people excited. And one final point on that as well, right? It's not necessarily just about us taking long format sport, creating short format content and branding it, marketing it, and distributing it through a whole bunch of different kind of novel channels. It's also about the context in which this happens, right? So it matters very much that we tell the stories around the people, the teams, the technology, the crazy billionaires that run these space companies, the magic of space itself, right? There's something intrinsic about what space is and what it represents that I think is going to be really compelling, where frankly, if it were in any other context, it wouldn't be as interesting, but space has this really special attachment to how we think about ourselves in the world that I think will draw in a lot of viewers. So we want to capture a little bit of that magic of space, a little bit of the traditional broadcast stuff, and then just kind of go off and go create this new fan experience that's driven through, again, short format vignettes dropped twice a day, every day, over days or weeks of race events. And that's an entirely new way of thinking about sports distribution and also the advertising around it.
Yeah, I freaking love it. So, tying it back to what we're doing, from fence ecosystem, but I think it's great, to your point, the amount of capital that's available for professional or high-end sport. I mean, F1 itself, I mean, damn, the programs behind those cars are more expensive than most spacecraft by a long shot.
Way more expensive. Yeah.
But another way to advance capabilities, you think of denied contested environments and be able to maneuver space or in contested environments where we've got the ability to quickly maneuver and understand and have investments into how to do it fast, efficiently, lowest energy, most control, autonomous systems to manage all that, the communication relays. And so a whole nother avenue of funding to create space capability set, which will directly correspond because the companies are playing in both, will play in both realm. You know, I would say our defense DOW space exploration, purposes. So, man, that is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think to that angle, right, I mean, there are just absolutely almost unending parallels between what we're doing and what the modern warfighter is looking for from a capability set, right? Now, of course, we're building something that's commercial, but it doesn't mean that there aren't real parallels, right? I mean, we are talking about, high maneuverability, fast repositioning, very, very accurate pointing, good tracking capabilities. All these things tie into the dynamic space operations requirements of Space Systems Command, right? These are things that are of interest. And that would explain why we've already had outreach from Space Force about trying to find ways to kind of go work together. I think that's interesting, but it's also really kind of beautiful if you think about this from the vendor ecosystem in the DIB, right? So if you're a mid-stage, contractor for the Department of War with a focus on space, you are obviously going after a very large pot of dollars right now, and that's wonderful. And I wish the best to everyone out there fighting the good fight. But there is a requirement for many of them to have dual use capabilities, right? You have to submit commerciality plans with a lot of your proposals. I tick that box quite beautifully for a lot of these people, right? Otherwise, it's kind of difficult, right? I came from a company that was building, big multi-million dollar sensors for, Department of War and intelligence community customers. And we had to get very creative when we thought about what we were doing for commerciality plans, because to be fair, there's not a lot of people out there that want to go buy a $7 million gimbal cislunar qualified sensor to go watch Chinese spacecraft, right? I think that's not a commercializable product. And, I can obviously wax philosophic on whether that framework even makes sense from a public policy prerogative perspective, which it doesn't, long story short. But the reality is it's what everyone has to go do. So if you're out there building weapon systems and you're trying to find a way to go off and go tell this commerciality story, so you're submitting a more competitive bid, we're a beautiful way to do that, because we're not totally fanciful, right? We're not like a made up story about like, well, hey, maybe an insurer will eventually buy our high end Chinese satellite tracker. Like, no, of course they're not going to. But we are a real, honest to goodness, near term opportunity to take capabilities that are identical to those that are being proposed to the Department of War and say, here's a way we can go off and go use it to make commercial money. And here's a deal structure, here's a timeline, here's a real path to dual use commercialization for capabilities that otherwise basically have zero commercialization capability for good reason. So we love that story. We also like the fact that, again, I think back to this idea of how do you demonstrate who's best, right? I think we get a lot of interest from folks who are in the DIB because of that, right? You've got 438 companies ish. I think that was according to the Space Fund end of last year, building propulsion systems. How do you know who's good? How do you know who's best? No one knows, right? I mean, like, even if you look at what people publicly state about their performance capabilities and demonstration missions versus the actual, ephemeris and TLEs that are out there, like, it is not always a one for one comparison. So from in the DIB buyer's perspective, it's a challenge. From a government buyer's perspective, it's even worse because these, procurement officers have huge amounts of work on their shoulders. They're not out there spending a day researching whether people are telling the truth or not on these things. They have to take some things face value. So I think fundamentally it's good for the DIB and for the government acquirers to have an apples to apples comparison opportunity to say, hey, look, I've got to go buy a spacecraft. How do I know which one's best? Well, a great way to do that is to go put them head to head and race them and go see who's actually able to do what they say they're bloody well going to go do.
Yeah. And it creates a fiscal model where they're not just trying to align themselves to fit into an acquisition. They can actually go run, a different commercial economic runway in order to, close the gap. I think also to your point, huge pot of money in space, but there ain't going to be that many people that get to stick their hand in the cookie jar, right? It's going to wither down once you get past these SIBRs and a couple but there's really good technology, but maybe their use case just seems a little too niche for the government to pitch in. They find their way into, to be something that's really critical or really empowering to yours, expand the capability, expand the growth. And now they've got their access into, as they've proven out their capability or enhanced it to support what you're doing, then they can roll it over to the other side. So
Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, I mean, it's a fair point, right? Not everyone's going to benefit from the huge amount of money that's getting invested right now. Some will do very well, but a big chunk of that's going to go to the primes, and we all know that. You got to put yourself in the seat of the CEOs of these smaller companies that are trying to figure out how to make this make sense. One, in the interim, having lived the Sibber to Sibber to Sibber life cycle, it's a struggle, right? It is hard. So any other alternative where you don't have to deviate from your core tech roadmap, where you're still operating on your primary customers' requirements, but you can still make money somewhere else, great, right? Like everyone should want to sign up for that because that helps you survive, and surviving is 90% of the freaking game, right? So I think that is just absolutely critical. Like again, you just can't persist unless you have the ability to go off and go, you know, do something other than for government, because that money spigot can disappear overnight, and we all have seen that too many times.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's great, and I think it's almost, I mean, it's probably not a great analogy, but in my, pea brain, I think, like Silicon Valley, really finally started driving innovation in defense, you know? Now you have defense, and so there you've kinda got that Silicon Valley bent, but now this is another avenue of you guys really helping to drive innovation in space as well, just a different angle and a different economic model where it's not raise a gazillion dollars just to go build your space thing, even though you're iterating and your software's great and new ways of manufacturing. That's a very different, model than what folks in your space would work, but they're both pitching into, bringing innovative different business model type of acumen to, our country, our national security interests, which is awesome.
100%. Yeah, and the way we like to think about it is that we wanna do for the space industry what, again, professional racing did for automotive, right? And if you look at that history, it was absolutely accretive to the benefit of the industry and all the users of automobiles, and eventually the transformation of our planet to the car, right? It meant new technologies, right? Literally new technologies that we all use today came out of the racing ecosystem. It meant new technologies coming to market faster. It meant stability, predictability, and quality systems in the industrial base that didn't previously exist, that were really important early on in the industrialization of the auto manufacturing environments, right? Like that. These are all things that have really good, clear benefits to space today, and thus accrue to all operators, whether civil, military, or commercial. It doesn't matter, right? Everyone benefits from this if we can execute on it.
That's cool. So good. So if you look at like blockers or challengers for you to get, this off, the ground, what are those biggest challenges? Are the things that you've got to figure out? Is it access to capital? Is it, what is it? I mean, I could sit here and pontificate, but you've already thought about
On month 1.5 of a new business that I quit my job as CEO to go start, which is slightly terrifying to actually say, there's many things out there that keep me up at night trying to think about what my bloggers are so I can get in front of them. So I mean, let's take the one we've already talked about as, the content generation side, right? So that is absolutely critical. I think we've seen this wild repricing of the sports asset classes over the last couple of years, right? Like team valuations, league valuations, content licensing deals are insane. Like UFC was what, $7-8 billion for their couple of years of rights, right? I mean, these amounts of money are absolutely huge. And as the top line goes up, there's obviously interest at the bottom line to kind of get into that ecosystem. So we're seeing, 20, 30 new sports properties, new leagues coming to market every single year. And they're not always going to be successful, right? So there's no guarantee that you get the eyeballs. So yes, producing content that is world class, that actually gets people's excitement, is absolutely first and foremost. That's one. Two, team engagement, right? So again, I don't have a score to people don't participate as teammates, not as teammates, as teams. But that is going much, much faster than expected. As I said, we've got a commitment from one company up in Seattle who builds satellites to go off and go fly a team in 2028. We've got a second in discussion. We are looking at a number of others, and fundamentally, and two universities as well who have already said that they're interested in flying in 2028. When I back up to like January 1st, I was like, look, I'm gonna spend the first 6 months of this year kissing babies, shaking hands, and waving the flag and getting doors slammed in my face. Maybe if I'm lucky in the second half of the year, I might get one person who says they're interested in participating at the team level. And I've already got that one. And I've already got another in discussion and a number that are in early discussion, right? So I think we're moving a little bit faster than expected there. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. Now I still need to make sure I convert those into actual real commitments that come with structure and timelines and rules and expectations. And, there's a real structure there. And that structure is very important for me because this is professional racing, right? We're offering $1 million purse to the winner of the 2028 championship. It's real money on the line, right? So this is not fly by night, we're all going to kind of do it and see what happens and maybe it works or not. Like it has to be fully structured from day one. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. So it's not a done deal yet, but we're trending very, very well. So content production, of course, is important. Team generation is important. And then, yes, capital. On that front as well, again, I think that has been going much, much better than expected, right? We've got now 4 angels backing us. That's wonderful. That gives us money to go off and go operate. We opened a small office over in Silicon Valley just a couple weeks ago. We're off, traveling the world again, kissing babies, shaking hands, waving the flag, doing the things we need to go do to go kind of raise awareness and promote this. But the reality is for me to get from, let's say, early 27 to late 28, which includes all of the pre-race content production stuff, us, visiting on a regular basis to tell the stories of the teams, us, engaging with our vendor ecosystem to go off and go create that infrastructure layer to go off and go actually demonstrate race operations. And then, executing on the actual race itself and then paying out for that first year's purse. That takes a few $1,000,000, and we're going to be out raising that the second half of this year. But again, the plan was to not even start that process until the second half of 26. And I'd say we've had a lot of inbound organic outreach from investors, which has been interesting. Again, those are very early conversations. We're just kind of saying, hey, here's what we're doing. Maybe we'll talk down the road. But just last week, I had an investor actually offer me a personal check. So, he basically reached out and was like, hey, this is interesting. We aren't going to invest right now, but I'd like to offer you a personal check. That to me is a great sign, right? If I'm not actively pitching VCs and I'm getting them, offering me personal checks, that to me makes me very, very happy. That said, right? I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. I'm not taking it as a given, right? I think capital is for very good reasons intrinsically scarce, right? Only good ideas should ever get funded, right? And I've put a lot of thought into my modeling, into my structure, into my go-to-market plan to make sure that I am inherently investable. And I'm spending the entire year de-risking all those things that investors should care about, right? They should care about whether I have partnerships within the ecosystem, check. Whether I have partnerships within the sports ecosystem, check. Whether I have team interest, check. Whether I have, the demonstrated ability to go off and go execute on the core elements of the operational model, like check, right? I mean, these are things that I'm going off and kind of trying to demonstrate. So by the time I actually want to go have those conversations, an investor can look at this and say, this is a wild bet. But if anyone's going to pull it off, this is the person who can do it because look at what they've already done with limited resources that they've got.
Love it. How about regulatory issues? I mean, I don't know. I could see issues in space. I don't. No one really owns space, but if it's a U.S. company, zipping around and putting other satellites at risk, and what does that framework look like? And is it hard to navigate, or has it been? It's a lot of space, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, it's all over the map. So a whole bunch of different things. One, we're not trying to be just US focused from day one, right? Like part of the beauty here is because we're operating a partnership ecosystem and we're not building spacecraft or handling data, we get to kind of deal with everyone, right? Like we're arguably the only US based space company that has any sort of play into our industry that can talk with Chinese satellite manufacturers or Russian folks, right? For good reasons, no one in industry talks to them right now because we shouldn't be. But from a competitive ecosystem perspective, there's no reason we couldn't have a Russian satellite racing a UK satellite or a Chinese satellite racing a US satellite. We actually like that. So long as we can do it safely and ensure that everyone's protected, why not, right? That's just good storytelling. And there's even a good history there if you look at kind of like the Olympics during the Cold War and how that played into the geopolitical element. We actually love that. But yeah, so one, we want to be fully internationally integrated from day one. Two, on the regulatory front, yeah, it kind of depends on who you're talking to and who's in charge that day. There's a lot of top line talking points about looking at trying to find ways to ease up the commercial operations world from a space licensure perspective. But when you look at the actual regulators, frankly, they're quite proactive and they're pretty aggressive, right? So, I think we're hearing some of those initial murmurings of like things that are business friendly on the regulatory front, but they're not necessarily being actually seen through day to day. That said, one of the reasons why we, again, I put a lot of thought into how to structure this to make it make sense, right? We've externalized all that regulatory burden, right? We are not handling controlled data. We are not operating satellites. We are not operating imaging systems. We don't need a NOAA license. We don't need an FCC license. We don't have CMMC requirements. We're not subject to ITAR or EAR, except in very, very limited senses of like, taking my laptop out of the country, right? We don't have any of those underlying compliance requirements that the average space company has. And that's quite intentional, right? I've lived through that as a compliance lawyer and in-house counsel. I don't want to spend money on CMMC. I don't want to spend money trying to figure out export licensure. I've basically built a business that takes all of that and puts it on everyone else. And frankly, everyone else is already paying for it, right? So I'm not asking them to go do something else. I'm just taking advantage of what they're already doing and saying, hey, cool. I'm just going to piggyback off your licensing. So I think fundamentally, that's actually a very straightforward thing. I think we're going to have a little bit of a challenge in the near term just because of the novelty of what we're proposing and because of some initial misunderstandings that people have. When I say, in space racing head to head competition, immediately people think like satellites in close proximity. And for obvious reasons, that's not a good thing. And that's 100% not what we're doing. And moreover, I've taken this one step further. And actually, with a buddy from law school, we just started the Federacion Internacional de Desport Orbito in Paris. And this is intended to be the like FIFA or FIA for orbital sport. And the idea there is, again, back to this theme of needing structure and professionalism from day one, we need to have an underlying professional framework for sustainability, responsible behaviors, and operational expectations so that, when we're operating, we're held to the highest expectations and the best practices of industry. So we don't do dumb things and we don't put people in danger, right? That is not at all what we're trying to do. We want to be a material benefit to the industry, not a risk factor for everyone to go off and go consider. So we very much like that leaning forward on the regulatory front. It doesn't mean that there's not regulatory issues that need to be addressed. But again, we're actively engaging already across the federal government to go off and go make sure that they understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're structured to externalize these things, and that we're going to go support our partners in their licensing.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. So if we look forward to, well, actually, the question I wanted to ask is more around space is obviously, and like the capability to be premier in space is a U.S. national security interest, you know. How do you look at worldwide engagement to this point? Are you propping up through foreign investment, I would say, countries that are not necessarily super friendly with the US? Are you giving them this avenue to create, a capital bandwidth to create their capabilities? You put much thought into like what countries are partners, or you just gotta get this thing moving before you get too deep into that?
Yeah, I think, and not to poo-poo myself too much, but I don't think we're big enough for us to have any impact at this point, right? If you were to think about Chinese engagement with a racing ecosystem, for instance, and whether there's any potential knock-on benefit to their industry to say, hey, look, we're going to give you guys as well as US entities an opportunity to go commercialize in this new vertical. Um, sure, right? Maybe they can go sell some ads and make a little bit of money. But the reality is Chinese industry and government is plowing so much money into their space capabilities right now. I don't think it would move the needle in any way, shape, or form to say we've opened up an opportunity for them to go off and go, create some of these ancillary revenue opportunities. Or even if I pay out $1 million purse to a Chinese spacecraft manufacturer who happens to win a race, it's $1 million. Is that going
Well,
to
but your true value, right, isn't it's the sponsor. I mean, you look at, so you go win, hell, you win the Super Bowl. It's not like, the Walmart family with the Broncos is pocketing a ton of money because of the prize money, right? It's all the other ancillary dollars that are coming to their business through sponsorships. And, I'm thinking like 2035. Now let's look out there.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess I approach this from the long-term defense operator, drum beating patriot that I am, where I think, well, we're obviously going to freaking win, right? The U.S. operators are obviously going to win, but let's say it doesn't, right? That we don't in 2035, we're eclipsed by a series of Chinese competitors who are better than us. I am a capitalist, right? I am also like egalitarian, and I do believe that if they can win and beat us in a fair fight, commercially in a race environment, let's be very clear, then they deserve to win, and we should try harder, right? And I don't know if I'd subscribe to the logic that like any sort of protectionism is good when it comes to competitive sport, right? That's like we have the Olympics for a reason, right? Where it really doesn't matter whether it's the U.S. versus Russia during the peak of the Cold War. We still competed head to head, and sometimes we lost, right? And where we lost, we would try harder the next time. And I think that same model can play out here. So, I think again, as as the, sitting here in North America and the US, obviously, like I don't foresee that happening. But I think if we ended up in that position where somehow we were not performing and our adversaries were outperforming us in a competitive environment, I think that would be fair and also a good incentive for us to go try harder.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good perspective. I mean, it's interesting. I just, you just don't think about it, but you're right. If they're kicking our ass in this thing, then we need to do better.
Right? Yeah. And to be fair, and if you're thinking about this also, I mean, to bring this back purely to the kind of the warfighter's perspective, right? I mean, one, over time, if you look at what data accessibility have done with F1, it's become really amazing, right? I mean, they're producing a million data points a second during a race. If we're doing what we're doing and we're scaling the way we want to scale, we're going to be producing some of the most amazing comparative data around real world operations of multinational spacecraft operations. And this is like gold to US warfighters, right? I mean, at the end of the day, seeing in real life how an adversary's platform could work versus our own is really, really useful intelligence, right? So I think again, there's a benefit here that far outweighs any of the risk. And again, I don't think we'll end up there. But if for some reason we're failing in all of our races because our adversaries are flying better tech, then shame on us, right?
Yeah, no, that's fair. Again, just a natural question. This is a very different slant than the ones I normally have, so it's great. So we'll start wrapping it up. We got a few more questions. 2035 Atlas Cup is becoming like one of the premier, let's say, sporting events out there, if you will. I shouldn't be called sporting. I don't know what else you would call it. What does the space industry why does it look different because you guys exist?
Yeah, again, this is back to the analogy of what professional racing and its various ecosystems did to the benefit of the automotive industry, right? If we can recreate that, which I think there's a whole bunch of reasons why we can, then it is fundamentally touching everyone, right? It is everyone. It is everyone from in-space comms to launch to, bus manufacturers, solar array manufacturers, onboard computers, space-based compute. It doesn't matter. Everyone will have a role to play, and everyone would either be benefiting from or suffering from it in a you know, appropriate manner on either end of that spectrum, right? And again, I think that this gets back to this idea of like I'm egalitarian in the sense that I actually think that there's a lot of pain, good pain that can be caused by a racing ecosystem, right? I think we have a bit of a glut of kind of fluff in the industry that is this like early stage venture backed kind of storytelling business that needs to go away, right? Like we need to professionalize what we're doing in space for a whole bunch of reasons. Part of that is national security prerogatives, but part of that is because this is the new West and there's a lot of money to be made. And let's get the nonsense companies out of the way. Racing can get the nonsense companies out of the way and get them out fast, right? Because either if you opt not to participate because you're worried about failure, that says something, or if you participate and fail, that also says something, right? So I think we'll separate the wheat from the chaff very, very fast. So what I would imagine if I'm wildly successful in 2035, we have fewer companies. Again, not a monopolistic fewer, but like if we have 438 companies building propulsion systems, let's knock that down to like 200. Like let's get 250 of them out of the market because they're probably not able to actually go execute. So we want to see that level of maturity, right? We want to see new technologies coming from this. We want to demonstrate the ability to go off and go really support dynamic space operations, prove out the maneuverability and pointing capabilities, and kind of like actually see that occur, especially by 2035. And we haven't even talked about this. We also are looking at other formats of kind of maneuver-based and opportunity-based sporting competitions. Think capture the flag. And that would be something that is substantially more required or more reliant on remote proximity and operations like docking and approach maneuvering. That gets very, very complex and very, very expensive. But frankly, in 2035, if we're not able to do that for fun, then there's something wrong with us. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that we can be doing in 2035.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. Quick lightning round, 30 seconds. A lot of this is more defense related, but with your perspective and where you're going, I think you might have a unique perspective on some of these things. So 5 questions, just real fast. What's the biggest myth about selling to the Department of War?
Predictability, right? Like that money that's available today is not taken away tomorrow. I think fundamentally, yeah, I mean, like budgets move constantly. So you got to take what you can take when you can get it, but don't plan on that it'll be there tomorrow.
Biggest lessons you've learned building and working space defense ecosystem?
Yeah, work with the right people. There are a lot of people who pretend to know what they're talking about who don't. So finding the right people to help you is like 80% of the ballgame.
Okay. One piece of advice for someone starting a defense space tech company today.
super self-servingly, I would say focus on ways to drive revenues from something other than Department of War exclusively. Now, most people think about that as like going after NSF grants or something like that, but no, like try to find, it sounds stupid for many of you who would be listening, try to find true dual use capabilities, like non-traditional things like racing, right? This is a must have as someone who's suffered through the cyber life cycle and the funding or constraints that creates. It, like being solely reliant on cyber dollars will drive you absolutely nuts and potentially into an early corporate grave. So
Yeah, that's great. What is a sacred cow in defense/space you think will be proven false?
again, back to my kind of personal experience, that would be space domain awareness technology becoming commercialized. I think fundamentally, for a very good reason, U.S. space warfighters have kept space domain awareness data and capabilities very close to the chest. It's all very highly classified. It's all sapped for good reason. But the reality is the proliferation of sensors and cameras and capabilities and international capabilities is moving faster than that, right? So I think that high compartmentalization, that high level classification, it doesn't really matter in 10 years, right? Like everyone's going to know where everything is anyways. So
And this again, some of these are maybe self-serving. What's the biggest opportunity in defense or space right now?
yeah, again, I would say it's any company that can manage to make money outside of the space industry, right? So I think communications has done this very well over the years. They're one of the few consistently successful sectors within the space industry, and that's because their revenues primarily come from non-space companies. Selling from one space company to another space company is very high risk. Selling from a space company to the government is very high risk unless you're a prime. The way to build sustainable long-term growth within the space industry is to find ways to take space technology and drive revenues from outside the industry. That's the most important thing.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, that's all time because I could sit here all day and we're going to have to get together again over beer and talk some more. But if people want to learn more about Atlas Cup, learn more about you, become a partner, talk about opportunities, how best would they do that?
Yeah, sure. So you can go to www.atlascup.com. You can find us on all the major social channels as well. And I'm easy enough to find out there on the interwebs as well. So we're easy to get a hold of, happy to talk. Again, our job right now is to go off and go talk to as many people as humanly possible and make sure everyone knows what we're doing and find where that opportunity may lie. So we'd love the chance to connect.
Kissing baby and shaking hands, right? That's where you are then now. Hey, Phil, so fun. Thanks so much. And look forward to the future and getting together.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Ned. Appreciate it.